Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Joe, here with me is my co-host Dan.
Hello and greetings.
Now, I wrote a article on Substack, which will be in the description down below. Do check it out, and do subscribe to our Substack, as we tend to do a lot of great content there. And here it is. This is a bit of an obituary for Akira Toriyama, the death of a creative titan. Dan will read it, and then we'll be conversing over it.
In the 80s and 90s, there were few men more busy and more successful or influential over the creative arts, especially comics, animation, and video games, than Akira Toriyama. The man who seemed to be the man seemed to be everywhere, with his most noteworthy accomplishment being his adaptation of The Journey to the West, the story which he called Dragon Ball, would have a lasting effect on a whole generation across the world. Dragon Ball wasn't simply a straightforward adaptation, as it brought in the idea of Son Goku being a child, rather than a monkey, and the idea of the MacGuffin Dragon Balls. What is more is that at the end of the first story arc, he delved a little into horror, which the lead character turned
With the lead character.
with the lead character turning into a giant. This giant destructive monkey in one of the most interesting scenes of all times with regards to horror anime.
Now, I do consider the first transformation a horror scene, as it has mounting horror, and you have Yamcha, Oolong, Puar, and Bulma growing increasingly concerned and suspicious as Goku tells them the story of the giant monkey and the full moon. And you, as the audience, are able to guess what happened. But here's the thing. You're watching it happen gradually, and the characters come to the conclusion. It's a bit of the Jaws thing, as the characters are coming to the conclusion, in a way that there's a monster under the deep. And there's a monster deep within Goku that he doesn't even know about. So it's a very fascinating scene, and I would argue maybe Toriyama should have delved into horror at some point and written a horror manga, because he would have been good at it.
After this, Dragon Ball became a more straightforward action-adventure story, and then got into a bit more into the fantasy side of things with the King Piccolo arc, where Goku's greatest rival, Piccolo, was introduced. The King of Demons was defeated and was to reincarnate into the much gentler, more honorable Piccolo, who was redeemed in the next storyline. Dragon Ball Z, as most know, was more sci-fi and revealed both Goku and Piccolo to be aliens and delved deeper into the two along with their assortment of friends. The series, though, did more than tell a ripping good yarn. It became a phenomenon bigger than any Batmania or Superman comic could ever be. There was a time when every person interested in cartoons and comics spoke of nothing else, and this was because of Toriyama's natural gift with storytelling and knack for always keeping the story going. The man was an inveterate workaholic, like many Japanese men are, and he moved on despite his fame from working on Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z to work on a brand new story in a brand new medium, Chrono Trigger for the Super Nintendo. The game was another home run for the incredibly brilliant Toriyama, but this time the project was a less lonely one, as it involved a whole team of writers, designers, developers, and so on. But Toriyama's name was everywhere all over the game, and it told a new story and had a variety of endings. Continuing to work in video games by working on the Dragon Quest line of games, which he lent his style of art to and his powerful name and creative voice to. It also seemed like every shonen anime has tried to imitate his story in some fashion, with only a few breaking out like he did. None, though, could quite match his work, though, as there was something altogether unique about his stories from the 80s and 90s. Of course, none could match it.
No, it's also grander in terms of scope. None of them ever come close. Because like you look at really like you look at that crap anime Naruto and Naruto and Bleach. What are the stakes? It's just the local neighborhood or the local country or the world. But the thing is, in Dragon Ball, it goes from being about the local area to then gradually it grows into pretty much a battle against fascism in the form of the Red Ribbon Army, the battle against them. Then from there it goes, and that I would argue is mostly encapsulating one or two countries. Then it goes into the fate of the world with the Demon King. Then it turns into the fate of the planet, which is kind of similar to the world in terms of stakes. But then it turns into the fate of the galaxy, that entire solar system or set of solar systems, given the Namek arc. Then it turns into, yes, to an extent, a battle for the planet, but in a way it feels like the stakes have been elevated, as the androids are capable of a greater deal of evil in some ways than even Frieza was. And then you have Cell, which this is for the fate of the universe, not just like the Milky Way, but the entire universe. So you have a gradual rise in scope. And the other factor is that the characters are far more archetypal than in any of the other shonen stories. Now, much as I like Yu-Gi-Oh! And Yu Yu Hakusho, and even to an extent Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, the characters are never end up being as deep in some ways as Dragon Ball. Nor are, like, another reason is none of them are ever as archetypal as Dragon Ball. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, the characters are warrior archetypes, but they're different shades of it in a lot of ways.
And yeah, I know you're going to have that one person. Oh, Naruto and Bleach get universal...
Nobody cares.
Nobody cares, and it just copycat Kamehamehas.
Yeah, they're just copycats. And the only copycat that ever came close was Yu Yu Hakusho, because there was genuine emotional stakes. The stakes were mostly on an emotional level. Yu Yu Hakusho's story is mostly an emotional one. I would argue Dragon Ball is superior because it's both cerebral and emotional. And at the same time, it digs deeper into the archetypal. Now, I love Yu Yu Hakusho, but the trouble with Yu Yu Hakusho is that some stories, like The Dark Tournament of Toguro, just has him talk on and on and on about how, what's happening to me, I made my mistakes, that whole song. But the thing is, you have Yu Yu Hakusho, which, while good, kind of never rises to the same level as Dragon Ball, arguably. And that's not me stating an opinion. I actually like Yu Yu Hakusho better. But objectively, Dragon Ball is better and bigger because Yu Yu Hakusho never sold quite as well. And it also has to do with the fact that in terms of storytelling skill, the writer or the mangaka of Yu Yu Hakusho was not as good as Akira Toriyama. Now, I think his drawings are slightly better. His art skills are better. But his writing, the thing is, his story really gets great around the Sensui arc. But the thing is, that's the Sailor Moon mangaka really helping to basically editing the story and helping her husband out with the character conceptual elements in terms of the writing, and she's really lending her voice as well to Yu Yu Hakusho. But while I love the Sensui and Demon King arcs, it's a little bit of the too little too late thing. The tone has been set, the standard has been set, it met a very high standard, but what makes Dragon Ball so special is that Toriyama had a greater gift for storytelling than those two. And also that he was able to hit a much higher peak in a way slower than the Yu Yu Hakusho writer, but also there was no trailblazer before him in a way. And Toriyama was also to kind of take a few more risks that Yu Yu Hakusho wasn't willing to take. And the thing is, I would argue redeeming Piccolo was a massive risk. Even killing Master Roshi off in the King Piccolo arc was a huge risk. That was a big risk. Killing Krillin off. That's a child you just killed off. Like, Toriyama never shied away from taking risks. The Mirai timeline, I would argue, was a big risk. That could have easily been considered by people jumping the shark. But instead, people ate it up and loved it. Mirai Gohan and Mirai Trunks were super popular. And creatively, he always tried to showcase generally the heroism of his heroes and the villainy of his villains, from Vegeta to Frieza and whatnot. They're very evil, and they're basically irredeemable. And the thing is, you have in Yu Yu Hakusho, the whole Shades of Grey thing, but I'm starting to think that doing that sometimes waters down your story, and the minute you water it down, you've weakened it. And there's a shyness when people approach the Shades of Grey towards archetypes. Now, at times, the Shades of Grey do improve things. Like the entire idea of the Android Saga shows Goku having spared Dr. Gero, but his usual act of mercy has rebounded far worse than with Frieza and come back to bite him and destroy everything, and in the future killed his son. So that's a huge amount of gray, which it begs the question, should Goku as a child have killed a pleading old man? Now, to Goku's mind, this was just an old man who was like 60 years old, and Goku felt pity for him and felt, I have to show some mercy because, like, this is an old man. He might have grandchildren. He doesn't, but then it's like Goku, like, if he killed him, he's behaving like a psychopath, arguably. But if he doesn't kill him, there's the possibility of this coming back to bite him. So it's very murky territory here. And Toriyama did approach it, but in a different way. And what's more is that Toriyama, I would argue, expected a lot more from himself than most other mangakas do. And what is more is that where they tend to, like, take the Yu Yu Hakusho guy, for example. All the characters, after a while, had some pretty convoluted backstories. Ryzen, Yoko, even Kurama. I'll actually just say Kurama. Hiei, Makoro, like, they all have really convoluted backstories. Yomi, my gosh, that one's convoluted. Yusuke and Kuwabara have very simple ones. Even Keiko. And this is why they have so much appeal as characters. It's because it's simple. The backstory should be kept simple. With Toriyama, what's interesting is you can summarize almost every character's backstory in under 3 sentences. Goku, well, let's just say, boy found on the side of the road who, on a full moon, turns into a giant monkey, and that's how he stomped his grandpa. Done. You have Chi-Chi, the son of the Ox... Not the son. The daughter of the Ox King. Wow. Freudian slip and really going all over the place mentally there. She's a daughter of the Ox King and a princess. Has a crush on Goku. That's her backstory. Ox King, the adoptive son of Master Roshi, trained by him, who became a king and has redeemed himself after spending a brief time as a tyrant after the death of his wife. He's... Actually, I could probably summarize that into a shorter set of sentences, but anyways. You have the Demon King Piccolo, the dark side of Kami, who escaped to ravage the earth, was sealed for a time, and has now come out. Piccolo, the reincarnation of King Piccolo, later gets redeemed by Goku and Gohan. You have Krillin, a boy who was bullied in a monastery and who ran away, became Goku's rival, and was adopted by Roshi and became Goku's best friend. Yamcha, a boy abandoned in the desert, found by Puar, who became a thief and later Goku's big brother figure. Like, that's the thing. They're very simple backstories, and at the same time, there's a constant, continuous theme of characters either being emotionally or physically abandoned or kidnapped or something. And they have to find their way, typically, to this newfound family that Goku's building. Because Tien, for example, was kidnapped as a child and raised to be an assassin and is redeemed. Now, Interesting fact, Tien and Yamcha are like older brothers to Goku, so those are two brothers he's adopted. Krillin is basically like a twin brother he adopted. Chi-Chi is his wife, obviously, and obviously the person he loves the most in the world, alongside his son, Gohan. Trunks would arguably be his nephew because Bulma's kind of a irresponsible, I would say kind of little sister figure. Yes, she's older than him, but she behaves so immaturely and irresponsibly, and eventually does become a lush for a time, so that Goku's basically the older sibling, having to take responsibility for her BS. And I would actually say Goku has more in common with Sitka from Brother Bear than Superman. And Bulma is very much, I don't know, like she's just an irresponsible little sister. You have, who else? You have Launch, who's a bit like a weird older sister, both of them. Master Roshi, she's basically a grandpa. Same with Kami. Weirdly, I might actually say that Piccolo's kind of also like a bit of a twin sibling to Goku. The two are mirror images of each other. And the two develop a really strong friendship. There. It's basically Goku's various disparate family members archetypally making their way home to Goku. But anyways.
He died, though, recently, which is incredibly sad as he is one of the most creative individuals from that era, dying of an acute subdural hematoma, a type of bleeding near the brain at the age of 68 years old.
He was young. It's so sad. I would argue he probably still had like 20 years of great stories in him. Imagine what he could have gifted to the world. Now, he did gift a lot, but at the same time, even if you're of the opinion it's time for him to relax and enjoy the bounties of victory, so to speak, over the creative industries, okay, but he never really retired. Let him enjoy 20 years of retirement to just enjoy his fortune. He's earned it.
There isn't too much to say here, other than he has been an influence on myself as I grew up, watching his stories, and reading them in French as a kid.
Yeah, because where we grew up, the manga was released in French, not English. And so we had to read them in French. And now, bear in mind, I'm the writer of this article. Might be easier for people if I read this part. I don't know. His was always a world I loved escaping to, especially as the death scene of Piccolo from the Saiyan saga and the first Super Saiyan transformation were to prove two scenes I really liked. Those, I think, are two of my favorites.
And the entire scene of Piccolo throwing himself in the way of the blast, of Nappa's blast to protect Gohan, that is something that should not be understated.
What I love is that, like, the way Toriyama sets up the scene, especially in the manga, you basically have, like, the blast. Well, you have Piccolo running, and I do love that the anime gives the flashbacks, Gohan, 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 throws himself in the way, and, but the manga adds to that by showing, it's fresher in my mind, I think, because I probably looked through the manga a little more recently than the anime, but you have, in each of the boxes, you have even Vegeta staring in shock. Like, I say Vegeta because even he's like, wow, I didn't see that one coming. You have Nappa who stares. Now, Nappa has a moment of fear because he's like, wait, he's still standing? How strong is this guy? Krillin and Gohan are naturally shocked. Basically, everyone's just staring, going, what the heck? There's only one character who saw it coming. Kami. Kami knew Piccolo would do this. Now, admittedly, Kami could see 1 year into the future. But at the same time, I think even without that, he would have seen it coming. Not through telepathy, not through clairvoyance, but just simply because he knows Piccolo better than anyone. And he's able to read Piccolo almost as well as Goku could. And in that moment, like, before the blast, even almost an hour beforehand in universe, he was like, oh yeah, Piccolo's going to sacrifice himself. I don't think Piccolo's going to survive this one. Because if anyone tries to throw a blast at Gohan, Piccolo's just going to chuck himself in the way.
This is even foreshadowed when Kami is preparing Mr. Popo, telling Mr. Popo, I want you to do this, do this.
Yeah, and you have Popo. But Kami. And you do have Kami who says, Piccolo is going to die in this battle. And like he keeps stating, Piccolo's going to die. And it's a great scene. It has a lot of build up, and that's how you do a death scene. You don't do it like, oh, I'm going to subvert, like, say, George R. R. Martin. I'm just, no preparation. No. When you're writing, you actually have to prepare. You have to kind of build up to the moment. Now, if someone like Martin never does, but that's because he's just pulling it out of his rear. But the thing is, with Toriyama, he understood basic storytelling. And that's why, for example, I would argue this death scene stays with people far more than, say, almost any death scene in, say, Yu Yu Hakusho. Well, except maybe Genkai's. Genkai's does stay with you. But at the same time, because it's not... Genkai's is not as powerful as Piccolo, because up to that moment, we've known him only as a villain. And suddenly threw himself in the way of Gohan. And what I like is... Now, the anime changes the dialogue, so that's much more about Gohan. But I like how in the manga he says, you and your dad have changed me. And he highlights that Goku always treated him with compassion, even love to an extent, like a fraternal affection. And Piccolo was always a little disconcerted by it, and yet couldn't help but return it, even as he felt a little afraid to bare his soul to Goku. But with Gohan, because it's a child, it's easier. And at the same time, he couldn't help but feel affection for Gohan. And it's even implied, it's not just that because of his time training Gohan, but it's because it's Goku's son. That deep down, because he liked Goku, there was a natural affection for the son as well. Because Gohan is almost a spitting image of his father as a child. And the thing is, Piccolo was naturally drawn to the San family. And the thing is, that death scene in the manga is really, really sad. Even the anime does a great job. So it's like, this is one of the most shocking and sorrowful scenes in Dragon Ball. And I would argue there's almost no scene that compares to it. Well, there are two other scenes. I didn't mention one in this article, and I wish I did. One of them, of course, is the Super Saiyan transformation. That first Super Saiyan transformation is just one of the coolest, but also one of the most impressive scenes. In a way, it's a coronation of Goku, where we see him fully come into his own as a man and as a fighter in a way that no other character in anime has ever done. There is no transformation that has ever managed to top that moment. And no other scene which can strike as much awe in you and make you go, holy mackerel. But what's more about the scene is that we have to bear in mind, Krillin was killed in that scene. And Piccolo was heavily, almost mortally wounded again. And so the stakes have never been higher. Now, they later get higher under Cell, but, like, the thing is, this is a big moment. For all we know, we just got Piccolo back, and he might just be over for him again. And this time, Piccolo did not try to give up his life for Gohan, but for Goku. We have confirmation here of the brotherly love between them. But then, on top of that, you have Krillin, who's been killed off. So Goku's basically having almost a nervous breakdown at the death of his two, I would almost say, twin brothers. They're both his twins in different ways. And that makes it one of the most powerful scenes, if not the most powerful scene in all of anime history. The other scene I would argue that was that struck with me and I find is one of the most powerful scenes and tragic ones is the death of Mirai Gohan, because that's a very powerful scene, and it's a scene that I would argue is the anime equivalent of Until All Are One death scene of Optimus Prime, because we've seen Gohan grow from child to man here in the Mirai timeline, and when he tells the androids, there is no end to me, there is no end, you hear? By killing me, you'll only give birth to a greater fighter. There will come a man who will carry the torch I have lit today. You cannot stop me. And he dies. Now, I would argue Gohan's death is shocking because, like I said, we see him go from baby to man here. Now, if only the actual Gohan had been as cool and awesome as Mirai Gohan, whom I rank as a better fighter than the Gohan from the Majin Buu saga. That guy was like, he is so stupid. That's not even Gohan. That was a disgrace of a character. Then again, Vidal was a disgrace of a character. But the thing is, Akira Toriyama had a natural gift, especially for writing very powerful scenes. Super Saiyan 1, Death of Piccolo, even Goku's realization that he was the giant monkey who stomped Grandpa Gohan is a powerful scene. And he wrote very intelligent characters, very tragic ones, and yet he captured something in the human spirit and just human psychology that very few writers could quite capture. And the man had a gift. That's all we can say. Like, no one has been able to top sci-fi like George Lucas has. No one. No one will ever top sci-fi like George Lucas. No one will ever top maybe shonen anime like Akira Toriyama. These are just plain facts. You can disagree if you want, but you can't disagree with reality. The truth is, no, like Akira Toriyama did not simply pioneer, but was the apex of shonen anime and shonen manga. I don't think anyone's ever going to create something as big as Dragon Ball Z. And no one's ever going to create a shoujo anime or manga as big as Sailor Moon. Many have tried, all have failed. Now, some have had a lot of success and made millions, but that doesn't mean they've succeeded at toppling the king or queen. Now, in regards to my own writing and whatnot, they are quite different from Toriyama's, but I like to think there's some influence. I also like to think that this laughter-loving, funny, brilliant man, because he was funny, and every picture I saw of him on the internet had him, for the most part, laughing. The man apparently had a very well-developed sense of humor and loved laughter and food and just enjoying life. There's something beautiful about that. I really hope he's in a better place now, and that he's up in heaven with the other greats such as Walter Scott, Tolkien, Howard, and many others, creating, drawing, writing, and laughing as never before. Like this guy, his legacy is just incredible. No one has ever quite done what he's done. It's freaking amazing what he did. Any last thoughts?
Yeah, the only episodes I watched was the first 10 episode of Dragon Ball.
But then we watched the whole Dragon Ball series.
Yes, and it was really good, and
the toilet humor was a little much, though.
Yeah.
But then once we got to the Red Ribbon Army, it was phenomenal.
And I do suggest you watch from Dragon Ball.
Yeah, because Dragon Ball Z was made better by watching Dragon Ball. Like, you really have to watch the original and then the follow-up.
And you could easily finish at the Cell games.
And maybe that one movie.
BoJack Unbound.
Yeah, which is basically an alternate canon to Majin Buu. And easily better. So, like, if you end with the Cell games or BoJack, that's good. Close up and end to the story, I would argue. And honestly, it's really, it's a shame he died so young.
Yeah.
I have to admit, it took the wind out of my sails. I did not know I liked this guy and his work so much until he was gone. Because I've always liked Dragon Ball / Dragon Ball Z, but I have to admit, Dragon Ball Super and GT kind of wore me down. Although I do like the one Dragon Ball Z game on the PS4 that you shared with me. But the thing is, I haven't given him much thought in a few years. But now I'm kind of like, I wish I had given him more thought. Because his stories were very hopeful and beautiful. And they helped you escape to a very fascinating world, a cool world where heroes are heroes and strong and mighty, and people help each other. It like he was capturing the most beautiful parts of human nature and humanity. Yes, he showed the wickedness of the villains as being something to truly be despised. You had true horror, like with Cell, who was draining his victims and devouring them, sort of, and absorbing them into himself. That was horrifying. But at the same time, the heroes were heroes, the villains were villains. There was some gray, there was some complexity, but the idea was that the world is a beautiful place. And Chrono Trigger did much the same. The characters were complicated. Hell, Magius is one of the most complex characters of all times. And he gets a massive redemption arc if you play through to the true ending of the game. So, the man could create, and there was a sincerity to all of his stories. Like a sincere desire just to help people escape. Like I said, I really do think the world has lost a very beautiful, shining star this day. Well, in the past few days. So, yeah. We'll see you all later. Do take care. Feel free to check out our article on Toriyama. And, well, have yourselves a great day. And if you want, crack open Dragon Ball again. Watch from the beginning. Or play Chrono Trigger or the Dragon Quest games he was involved in. Like, honor this man. He was a great one.